Okay guys, so I wanted to make a short video on how to sew a edge-to-edge pantograph inside a border and never run over your edges. So here's my quilt all set up. I've stitched the top border already and I'm ready to start my edge-to-edge pantograph inside that border. So the first thing you're going to want to do is, before you stitch anything, baste your quilt on. Once you have your whole quilt basted, what I like to do is roll my quilt forward and measure the exact inside length of my border. So I'll start with a stick and I'll lay it right there, and then I'll come down here and I will mark. You can see my chalk mark where I mark and I write that measurement down. Then I roll it forward and I start at that seam line and I mark it again after I've rolled it forward, and I just keep doing that, and I'll do it a couple of times to make sure I got my measurements exact. I write them down, I add them up, and that's how I get my measurement of my length. Like I said, I do that a couple of times just to make sure I actually got it correct and I've come up with the same answer both times. That gives me the length after it's been basted on and stretched out, because measuring a quilt before it's basted down, you're not really getting a good measurement of what it is once it's pulled tight on your machine. So that being said, after I've done all that and I've stitched my top border, then I set up my pantograph, and as you can see here, I have my pantograph all set up the way I want it. And the first thing I do when I set up my pantograph is I put in my, let's see if I can zoom in here. Sorry, I'm not real great at this yet. So I set up my height and my width, the total height and the total width. And then, and I'm using Panto Mode Advanced for this. And there's a reason behind that. I've never tried using the others for this particular, for when I do edge to edge inside the borders, so I apologize because I haven't tried the others, but it works with Panto Mode Advanced. Just so you know, one important thing I do when I'm doing a panto inside of a border is I try to pick an edge to edge that has nice square edges, something that doesn't need to be nested usually. So it's going to start and stop and end well without having to piece in at the bottom or the top or the sides. And in the case of the one that we picked the Springtime Waltz. And as you can see, it's got a very nice straight bottom and a very nice, without a lot of gaps, in other words. Go. Alright, so once you've got your measurements, what I like to do is enter my width and my height minus a ½ inch on each one, and I'm going to show you why in just a second. So I go over here, I go sew in zones, and when you're sewing inside a border, I recommend using the 4-point placement, and the way you get to that is go to Zone Manager and click till the 4 yellow lights. If you change that, it'll be center. We want the 4, and I'll show you why in a minute. Okay, so we're ready to do our placement, and a lot of people will go up here and try to line their needle up with that corner. That's not what I do. What I do is take a ruler that has a corner guide on it, and I set it right on my seam lines. Then I put my needle, or my foot, right up against that ruler, and then I come up here and I place it. do that again because my stomach was leaning against the bar and that will distort it. So then I move down to the other side and I do the same thing. I lay my ruler right up against my seam edges, put my foot right in the corner and place it. Now, the reason that you subtracted a 1/4 inch back there on your height and your width is because now your border is going to print 1/4 inch down from the top and 1/4 inch in from the edge. You do not need to set C and D, just push lock height. Now, let's say your border is wonky. Maybe the quilt weaves in and out and maybe it's not perfectly straight and you're concerned about it stitching over into your border. You don't want that to happen. If you have gold, which you can't use pantograph advanced without it, you go up here and you hit plugins and then you go over here and you hit fabric comp. And I only do this if my borders are not real straight. Say the person who quilted it, maybe it pulls in places real bad and I couldn't straighten it up. And then I come up here and I make sure, see the dark green line is right now on the top. I know my top line is straight. I don't need to worry about that. So I'm going to say next, and now it's on this side line. And I'm going to come down here. I've got my ruler right up against my seam line and I'm going to hit plus. And I'm going to come down a little ways and I'm going to hit plus, always making sure my ruler is right against that seam edge, and keep doing that. Keep hitting plus until I get down to where it is ready to stop. And so by using my ruler as my guide for my foot, if you look, when I have my ruler up against that seam edge and I move it, you can see that my guide is running right along that seam edge. So now I have it to where the fabric comp is going to allow for any bowing. This one I happen to have set up pretty straight, but I wanted to show you that if you do get one, because I know this quilt happens to bow in the middle and I couldn't do much about that. So then you press OK. You don't worry about your bottom one, you worry about your left and your right. You never worry about the top and bottom on this, just the left and right for the fabric comp. Okay, so now we're ready to sew. After I sew this zone, I'm going to come back and show you what, or your next zone. I'm going to come over here and it's going to do it again, so it's ready to say single stitch. And I'm going to say mark next because it pulled out before I got a chance to mark the last one. So didn't have my thread in my hand. So I'm going to go back and just redo it because I'm not sure I marked the right spot. And I like doing it this way. You can do it however you like doing it. This works best for me. And yes, I missed. That was the wrong spot. So I'm going to say single stitch. And I'm going to say continue now because I've marked them both. And it's going to say, are you sure you've marked all your zones? I like to say don't show again and don't show again. But those are personal preferences. So I have now put a little chalk mark with my chalk pencil where that needle went in. Okay, so I've rolled my quilt forward and I have my marking dot right there. And if you notice, it's right up against the seam line because this quilt bows in quite a bit. And if I were to go ahead and put my next mark, my A on that mark, it would stitch over the line when it got further down because this quilt bows in the middle. Her squares got tighter and tighter towards the middle and then flared back out on the edge. So what I'm going to do is take my ruler and I'm going to make my top edge 1/4 inch above that mark, where my needle will still be hovering over that mark centered wise, but it's up against the edge of the seam. And then I'm going to go up here and I'm going to push that button. So now I have that where I want it edgewise. Then I'm going to move it across the quilt. I'm going to go over here, and the same thing over here. I have my little circle where my thing was, and this one's pretty close. It's not far from being off, and I can use the edge of my foot up against this seam edge. If you don't have a ruler, you can do that. And I don't know if you can see, but I do have my needle centered over the dot horizontally. I just don't have it centered vertically so that it will still stitch horizontally where I want it to. It's just going to stitch vertically, not any further than that edge. Now the trick to this is do not have your lock width button pushed. Make sure that is not checked, that only the height is checked. Okay, and then on this one, because it does bow in so badly, I'm going to go up again and I'm going to use the fabric comp. So, and once again, we don't need to worry about the top or the bottom line, we just need the sides. So I'm going to say next, and then I'm going to use the edge of my foot. You can use the ruler, the edge of your foot, whatever works for you. I can slide it right along the edge of that foot and hit the plus sign in a few places as I go down. Hit the plus sign, and as I go down, then I come back up here and hit the, oh, I think I gotta move that over just a little, hit the plus sign, and go down some more, and hit the plus sign. And if you can see, that moved in quite a bit. And if I had not done the fabric comp, that would have stitched over the line and into my border, and I do not want that. So now I'm going to say next, because we don't have to worry about the bottom line. I'm going to say next again, so the dark green line is on the left edge, and I'm going to go over here and I'm going to do the exact same thing. Now my left edge is a lot straighter, but it does bow in a little bit, so I'm still going to do the fabric comp on it. And because I'm holding the camera, I'm just going to rely on the edge of my foot to be right on the seam line. What I mean is right here, the edge of my foot is lined up on that seam line so that I can get pretty close. And because I've given myself a little 1/4 of an inch by using the edge of my foot and not the center of the needle on that line, I can be pretty close and still be good. And this one does bow in more than I thought that it did. I knew when I basted it I was having a really hard time with it because it bowed in. So if you look, you can see that line bows in there and that line bows in there, and that's going to guarantee that no stitching is going to go past my seam line into my border. I'll come back and show you when we can move along. So while this is stitching the second zone, I'm going to show y'all a little mistake I made and what not to do. So you notice I put my clamps on my left side and forgot to put my clamps on my right side. Now I've checked underneath and my batting is still nice and straight, or my backing is still nice and straight, so I'm not going to worry about it. But one thing you don't want to do is you do not want to put those clamps on after you've marked it and started stitching, because it will pull it over and mess up where you are on your stitching, and it will end in the wrong place against the edge. So just go ahead and let it stitch out if you've forgotten to put your clamps on and you've already marked it and started stitching. Okay, we're on our last zone, and we have our normal marks where we're going to put our thing and mark for A and B just like normal. The only difference is now we're on our last zone, so after we mark A and B, you're going to unlock the height and mark C and D by going in these corners, lining up your foot with the seam line, push C, then go in the opposite corner and do the same thing and push Z or D. After you've done that, you can use your fabric comp again to comp your sides if you need to, and if you need to, you can comp your bottom. Do not comp your top. And then you're ready to sew your final zone. And when you're done with the last zone, you'll notice not one spot overran our border. It's perfectly stitched. Have fun!